In Matthew chapter 24, we're looking just at this one verse, verse 15. When you see the abomination, now what is an abomination? Bdelugma, it's a strange word. Basically means that which is abhorrent, that which is detestable, that which is utterly repulsive to God. The word is primarily used to speak of things associated with idolatry. It is used in Revelation 17:4 and 5 of the abominations of the false religious system known as Mystery Babylon, the prostitute, the harlot. It is used in Revelation 21:27 where it talks about the fact that in the final heaven there will be nothing there that abominates, nothing there that is repulsive to God. The Old Testament predominantly associates it with idolatry and the artifacts and the activities and the rites and rituals and ceremonies and idols that go along with idolatry. So it is a word that has basically to do with heathen gods, idol gods, which are detestable to the one true God. Now you will notice there's a genitive form here in the Greek. It is the detestable thing which desolates, which lays waste, which ruins, which desecrates. So there's going to come then a great event in the future of Israel in which there will be an idolatrous act that is an abominable thing to God, that is a detestable thing to God, and that will cause the ruination and the destruction and the devastation and the waste of the holy place. You see it there? The holy place. Now, what is the holy place? Some people say the land, some people say the nation, the people. Well, some people say the city of Jerusalem. What is the holy place? In Acts 21:28, it says, I think very simply what it is. Here, Paul came back to Jerusalem after his journeys into the Gentile area. He wanted to reaffirm his commitment to the Jews. He wanted them to know that he was not a traitor to them in any sense. So he went into the temple to go through some purification ritual with some of his Jewish friends. And when he was in there, there were some Jews from Asia who had known him over there and knew that he preached the gospel. So they started a riot. And this was their accusation against Paul in verse 28 of Acts 21. Men of Israel, help. This is the man, that is Paul is the man, teaches all men everywhere against the people and the law in this place, and further brought Greeks also into the temple and hath polluted this holy place. And it can't mean anything but the temple. It can mean nothing but the temple. And I don't see any reason for it to mean anything other than that in verse 15 of Matthew 24. It is the temple, the holy place. That's nothing new for us. The Old Testament calls it the holy place. There was the holy place and then there was the Holy of Holies, of course. But the whole place was called the holy place. That place set apart unto God. And it is a specific place. So I think it very clearly indicates the temple. And it happens when it is established in the temple that there is something detestable to God that devastates, ruins, and lays waste that temple. Now you say, well, how do we know what this is? Well, it helps us, gives us a key in verse 15. See it there? It's that abomination of desolation, not just any abomination, not just any event, but the one spoken of by Daniel the prophet. The one spoken of by Daniel the prophet. Now all we have to do is go back and find out what Daniel said. Let's do it. Chapter 11. Now in chapter 11, the first part of the chapter, and this is a rather long chapter, is devoted to some historical things, and the latter part to the end time things. But while you're looking in chapter 11, notice verse 31. And here in verse 31, we have a very, very graphic description of an interesting historical figure. And by the way, I don't know that any Bible commentary that I've ever read, no matter what their viewpoint on prophecy, has ever interpreted this any other way, at least no reputable scholar has, than as a reference to an historical figure by the name of Antiochus Epiphanes. He was a Syrian king who basically reigned from about 175 to 165 BC. He called himself Epiphanes, which means the Great One. He wasn't a very modest fellow. So he called himself Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus the Great One. The people called him Antiochus Epimanes, which means maniac. So I suppose they didn't call him that to his face, but that's what they called him. But anyway, this particular man is a very interesting figure. In verse 31, it says this about him, and if you study the whole text, it's clear who it is. History makes it very obvious. Forces shall stand on his part, and they'll pollute the sanctuary of strength, take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that makes desolate. There's that same phrase again. He is going to bring about an abomination of desolation. That is Antiochus Epiphanes. So here we have a historical picture of what the end time abomination is going to be like. He was a great persecutor of the people of Israel. If you read, you'll have an old Catholic Bible, or you can get an Apocrypha, you'll find the books of Maccabees, 1st and 2nd Maccabees. If you look in there, you'll get a whole rundown on Antiochus, because it was written in the period in which he lived. A period about 400 years after Daniel prophesied and prior to the New Testament era. But you read in there that he tried to stamp out Jewish religion, and in so doing, he slaughtered thousands and thousands of Jews, including men, women, and even children. He, in the worst act as far as Jewish history is concerned, desecrated the temple. He abominated the temple by going in there and slaughtering a pig on the altar, and then stuffing pork down the throats of the priests, and then setting up a god in that place. An abomination, a Greek god. I think it was Zeus. And so this was a time, it wasn't just a one act. He put Zeus in there, and the temple became desolate. The Jews never went back. They wouldn't go near the place. They wouldn't go to a defiled place. And the daily sacrifice was completely stopped. And that's exactly what 11:31 of Daniel says he would do. He would come along, pollute the sanctuary. He did, slaying a pig on the altar. Took away the daily sacrifice. That's exactly what happened. They made no more sacrifices there. And the place was so abominable that it became desolate. The Jews never went back. And that is exactly right. And it was not changed until the Maccabean Revolution overturned his power, and they were able to go back to their religion. Now, that sacrilege committed by Antiochus Epiphanes in the 2nd century BC is a foretaste and a preview of the final kind of sacrilege that will be committed in the end time. It'll be very much the same. Very much the same. And Daniel speaks of that one back in chapter 9. So let's go back to 9. By the way, Daniel mentions abomination of desolation 3 times. 3 times. Now, back in chapter 9, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. We don't have the time. But in chapter 9, Daniel has a tremendous prophecy about the history of Israel redemptively. And he says in verse 24 that 70 weeks, 70 heptads, 70 weeks of years. The weeks here are weeks of years. 70 weeks of years, 70 times 7, or 490 years, are determined on thy people Israel, at the end of which transgression is finished, sin is ended, iniquity is made reconciliation for, everlasting righteousness comes, visions and prophecies are sealed up, and the most holy Messiah is anointed. Now there it is, folks. 490 years to the end. 490 years to the kingdom of Messiah, when sin is done and the righteousness reigns in the kingdom.